Now, thank you everybody for coming. Let me take a moment to kind of officially welcome you and help land us and bring us together, and then we'll bring the focus to Jody. So to begin, this series is called Connecting to Self, Nurturing Others. And so it's for educators, and we've also welcomed many people in the mental health profession and parents who are nurturing our young people during this time. And so that's the specific focus of these calls, is really those of us attending to our young people. And the fact that we're here, I want to acknowledge, is the inspiration of Tawfiq Hakim, the executive director for the Foundation for Self-Leadership. And it's through the inspiration and energy and leadership of the Foundation for Self-Leadership that this series is happening. So I want to really acknowledge and thank them. And my name is Joanna Curry-Sartori. I'm mother of an 11-year-old. He'll be 11 on June 11th, very soon. I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I'm also the founding director for the Self-Leadership Collaborative. And our specific focus is in schools and partnering with learning communities to discover how we can support well-being that's not just about a curriculum or an intervention, but really a culture, a way of being together where we're accessing our best self and drawing that forth in each other. And I often think about how, you know, often we're focused on the program or the plan or the initiative or the intervention, and the effectiveness of that, I think we so often find, actually, if we look back behind it, it starts with us, that we're the instrument, we're the tool, we're the tuning fork. What's our state of being? How are we attending to ourselves? As Jody talks about, the inner life of the educator, the teacher, the caregiver. As we're in a state of wellness, then in each moment, in each interaction, we can show up and be present and effective with our young people. And to me, that's the heart of social emotional learning. And then the curriculum or the intervention is the formal structure and format that can reinforce and support the consistency and the effectiveness of that way of being together. But it starts with us. And so that's what brings us here during this time. For those of you that might not know, the other thing I want to acknowledge is that the approach that Jody and I are speaking about and sharing about today is inspired by internal family systems, a really profound psychotherapeutic model developed by Dick Schwartz that many of us are finding really is not just a psychotherapeutic model. This is not a tool, it's a paradigm, it's a way of living, it's a way of understanding the roadmap into how do I relate to myself with compassion? How do I find and access that best self, that core self in me? What do I do with the other parts of me that come up and hijack and take over? How do I relate to myself in a way where I don't just try and stuff that, I don't try and override it, I don't battle with myself, I embrace myself. And that as we do that, we're in position to actually really embrace and be present with our young people. So clearly, this is what this time requires. This is what's needed. And that's why I'm just so thrilled to welcome you, Jody, who for years has been a pioneer in bringing IFS and self-leadership to teachers. Let me just share a little bit more about her background so you have a sense of the incredibly wise, fun, and gifted person who's with us here today. And I'll let you crack us up in just a minute, Jody. So she is a licensed marriage and family therapist and also a doctorate in education.
Correct.
Executive director for Change, Inc., a community-based social service agency providing school-based mental health services in 30 schools in the Twin Cities. Holy cow, that's a lot.
It is a lot.
Yeah. For the past several years, the Foundation for Self-Leadership has supported Jody's work to bring IFS principles and practices to teachers and schools. She's presented on IFS and schools in the past at the IFS annual conferences, and that's where Jody and I have had the chance to cross paths and enjoy each other's company a number of times. Yep. And she just brings great wisdom, as I said, humor, skill, delight, and depth to this pioneering and exciting effort. So perhaps, Jody, you could begin by just telling us a little more specifically what you've been doing with regard to the inner lives of teachers.
Sure. And I had shared with you, Joanna, yesterday when we talked a little bit that I have COVID brain. And what that means is I think I've lost about half of my vocabulary. And I have a case of ADHD a little bit. And so keep me on track here. And I thought, let me say a little bit more about my background and how I came to have these opportunities. So basically, I graduated from high school in 1969 which gives you some sense of time frame here. And I was beginning to develop kind of my moral and ethical sense of things, and I knew that I wanted to do good in the world. And as Watergate and Vietnam and all that kind of time. And so I got inspired actually by a B movie called Billy Jack. And I'm embarrassed to say that set me on my trajectory of my career. But there was a main character in that movie that ran an alternative school. And I, like I said, was very inspired by that. So my next opportunity when I got my undergraduate degree was to come up to Minneapolis. And my first job was as a street outreach worker. And I just started working with kids who were dropped out, kicked out, truant, involved in the juvenile justice system, later gang involved, kind of the furthest out kid. And I just found my place to be in the world. And so I have followed that kid around for the last 40 years, basically. And so that's what has been my North Star. I have been, like I said, connected with alternative schools for my entire career. So I had a degree in education, then I went and got a degree in counseling, and I am also a licensed marriage and family therapist, went back and got another degree in education. So I've had these two twin career moves of mental health and education. And so when about the last 15 years, school-based mental health was invented, then that was like the perfect moment for me and a perfect place for me to use my skills and talents and interests. It's kind of like I think of it as my Reese's. It's my chocolate and my peanut butter are those two things coming together. So currently in the agency that I work, we do have 30 school-based mental health efforts going in the Twin Cities, and then we also have an alternative school of about 150 young people ages 16 to 24, large numbers of immigrant and refugee students. And so then who knew school could close in the way that it has? So it's been quite an interesting isn't even the word. I don't even know how to describe it entirely. And I know the rest of you that are involved in schools are having similar experiences. It's been kind of mind-blowing that all that you had worked to put together has been, transformed isn't the word, but like switched up here. We hope transformed in the long run, but that's what our experience is now. And then about 15 years ago, I got involved, as Joanna mentioned, as you mentioned, Joanna, in internal family systems. I had been running out of gas in my own professional life. I thought I'd better go learn something new, so I picked that and have been so glad that I chose to do that. And what that experience was for me and is for me currently is it just began the time frame for me of doing my own work. And I really, even though I had trained therapists and I'd trained educators, I really hadn't done my own work up until that time. I was telling other people kind of what to do. So that experience caused me to pause and to go inside, as we talk about, and get to know myself better, and what makes me up, and why I do the things I do, and why I like the people I like, and why I don't like the other people, and all that kind of business. So it's been kind of my journey to self-awareness and self-understanding. So as I had these other opportunities of being in the mental health arena and being in alternative ed and then public education in the way that we are, and having these own kind of really profound experiences of self-awareness and self-understanding in the world. And like Joanna, you had talked about being able to be in self and be in that centered space, I started to integrate that learning, that personal learning, in the work that I was doing with educators and therapists. So had the opportunity about 3 years ago, I think, with the Center of Self-Leadership, TUFIC, helped fund a project that was in fact, at the time, I thought this is probably the most important work I've ever done. And that's pretty great to have that experience. But what we did is we sought out two middle schools, one in North Minneapolis, one in South Minneapolis, and got them on board. And I did, I and a partner, Jenny Garrido Santos, and an evaluator, Jennifer Griffin Wiesner, worked with those two schools for the course of a year. Gave a kind of your basic all school, all staff professional development in this, what's referred to as parts work, understanding that we've got protective and vulnerable parts, and that we've got a self that we can access, and that this is how we want to show up in the world of kids. So we did that for both full staff, and then invited some teachers to apply to be part of a year-long project. And so we chose 16 teachers, 8 from each school, and we met once a month for 4 hours for about 10 months. And we took them through the process that I had been going through in terms of internal family systems, shared that with them. They swooped that up right away. And we went on into more kind of mental health areas in terms of trauma, in terms of attachment, and then how does that show up in the classroom. But basically, and this is where Joanna, you and I intersect, is our idea was, in fact, I never brought up students or classroom the entire time from a facilitating standpoint. I was focusing only on them and their life and how they were making sense. Now, as the project went on, of course, they're teachers, so they started talking about kids and classrooms and what have you. It was also the year that the Parkland shooting happened, so there were just other things that came into our work together. But I was mostly focused on the adults, and with the idea being at that point in time that if we can wrap some good things around the caregivers, around the helpers, then things are going to go well for kids. And so it was by intent that I didn't come in with, and now you can turn around and do a curriculum for children, but rather this is about you. And one of the things that really hit me during that time was that they hadn't had that experience before. I don't think that group of teachers had ever had anybody just be curious about them and compassionate about them and wanting, the best things for them. They've certainly had a lot of PD about how to do social emotional stuff for kids, a lot of professional development around pedagogy and curriculum and that sort of thing. But they just didn't have many experiences where someone was saying, and how are you doing? And how do you know how you're doing? And I was struck by the fact that I'd also been involved in training therapists, and that we very regularly with therapists say, how are you doing? And it's, there's a phrase in marriage and family therapy of person of the therapist or self of the therapist, and this sense that you should do your own work and should have all this self-awareness and self-understanding and self-reflection. But I didn't feel that teachers in their training had gotten that same experience, even though that's as critical. So that's been kind of my mission ever since then. It was a great year. They reported at the end of that they had increased, all of them in terms of greater levels of compassion and curiosity and creativity. And so it was just very rewarding. In the last year, I'll just quickly, we've been invited to work with a comprehensive high school in St. Paul. And this is a school that has done a lot of evaluating of climate and that sort of thing. And they felt like they've made a lot of progress in things that they're doing with students and that, but the nut that they couldn't crack is adult relationships in the building. And they really felt like they just, wish that they had better collegiality and people enjoying work with one another better. And so again, we've gone in on kind of a monthly basis and done introduced parts and going inside and understanding yourself and how that shows up in your relationships with other caregivers. So it's been a very great experience, and it's been very transparent about how you all get along. You set the climate in the building, and so currently, even with when COVID shut everything down, that kind of came to a halt in March. But one department has reached out to say, would you work with us and facilitate our relationships? We just have some patterns that we're not liking, and some things that we'd like to get through that we're struggling with. And so I'm you know, fooling around with this long distance piece with them and doing some work with that team, which has been pretty great as well. So that's some of the work that's gone on or going on.
So as I listen to you then, Jody, I'm, first of all, it's again, to just sort of hear you express it in a nutshell. What a journey. And part of the breakthrough, it feels like, is this conviction to hold true to the importance of the well-being of us as adults,
right?
To support us in truly being able to show up for the young people. And so what I'm curious about is, during this time then that we're in now, I know it's trickier for all of us to stay connected and to check in. So what thoughts do you have right now about attending to the inner lives of teachers and the relationships amongst the adults? So I know you're experimenting with that. What other nuggets could you share about what are the possibilities? What are your hopes there? What can we be doing to attend to the inner lives of teachers?
I think, you know, and and then of course I'm running this small school, or directing this small school as well. So, you know, like everybody else, I'm about zoomed out, right? But yet that's what we've got. And whether that's through Teams or Zoom, you know, we have set up regular, you know, whether it's a book club, you know, whether it's, you know, I mean, we have to be ready, and I'm sure you're all feeling this, you know, I mean, it just and also as an educator is, you know, there was kind of you know, we hit the ground kind of running, and I was really proud of everybody in terms of, you know, standing up and pivoting and all that kind of business. And now we all teach distance learning, even though half of our students don't have a computer. I mean, you know, there was all that sort of crisis, go, 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 go. So we're through that phase, and now we're into kind of the grind of maintenance, and now looking at summer and waiting for guidance on summer. So there's a lot. One of the things I'm aware of as teachers, and this is true with other professions as well, I'm sure, and therapists, is there's just a heck of a lot out of our control right now. And how do you show up in that space? And just, you know, that sort of, I mean, just really radical uncertainty of, you know, what the near future or the far future is even going to look like. So I think providing space for people to come together to talk about how that's landing on them has been much of what we do, like we're doing here. The other thing that we've little thing that the therapists invented. So we've mostly been sheltering at home. That's lightening up here next, or in June 1st. But we consider ourselves to be essential providers of critical services, as both as therapists and teachers. We also do meal distribution here. So there's that. But like, I'm in my office here, I have 2 lawn chairs. And so we call it walk and talk. With the children, little kids, we call it chalk and talk, where we will go with social distancing and all that business and the mask and 6 feet away, that I will go and talk in person. So I've done that with different teachers, and you know, just sit at the end of their driveway, and just to be able to have the proximity, I think for some people is important. So we've done that as well, but otherwise we're zooming it up. And although also, and I had heard this somewhere, that just the intimacy of a telephone call is good too. And so I've made a point to, even when I'm driving, which isn't the great thing, but it's just to call different teachers and call different therapists to say, how are you doing today? And, you know.
So just that human contact and touch base. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm wondering if I can just convey a sort of story that came up from an experience that happened for me this week, related to this question of, like, how do we check in? And for me, it brought up a lot of questions and reflections, both about how do we check in with ourselves and with each other as adults, and then in turn with our students. So the context was that I've been thinking a lot about the fact that both now and as our school communities evolve, one of the big questions I think that educators have on the table is, how do they connect and check in with students and students' inner lives, right? And students have so much going on right now, and they have such a limited pool of people to share with. So even if they're touching base with a teacher online, if there's a way to say, how are you? What's it like inside? What's on top? How can I just be a human and understand you? Like that, providing any framework of connection with students seems vital. And that for the amount of students that need that processing, there's no way that our mental health teams in the schools could possibly connect with all the students who need that amount of attention. So I better be brief, but I've been thinking, how do we support teachers as much as possible to feel confident in having students with adults? I mean, teachers having conversations with students,
Right.
about how they're doing. So I brainstormed a list of questions around this, and I was floating it in the school community that I work in. And interestingly, some of the teachers are like, yeah, no, those are good questions, and we're confident. That helps us have a broader palette of questions to ask. And interestingly, the social workers and psychologists raised the question of, well, how do you know what the current circumstances are for that student, and how challenging or difficult it might be? And how do you know if that student has a trauma background? And how do you know what's the balance of reaching out and connecting, but then not opening up a can of worms, so to speak, right? And I'm thinking about your background as a trauma specialist. And
right.
So I just found myself sort of internally, there was two parts of me. I was a little polarized, like I'm wanting to support us to connect in every way possible with our students. And I really respect the concerns that came up from some of my mental health colleagues saying, yeah, but we need to be really, really mindful of what we're opening up and what we're equipped to handle. So whether we're with our colleagues and our friends, or we're with the students, what's the best way to conduct that checking in? And what's the best way to speak for the different parts of us? What's the best way to get back home? So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I'm really in support, Joanna, of you heading in that direction. Just what I know about the work that you've done in social emotional learning, and how you've entered into the school domain in terms of resourcing teachers with both the sort of parts and self-led concepts that we're bringing in, but also your grasp of social emotional learning. So I'm very confident that what you're putting together, and I've seen a little bit of it, I think is excellent. I think, my experience in schools is that I'm also teaching at St. Mary's a beginning systems class. So I've got systems on the brain. And obviously schools are systems, and classroom is a system. They are systems within systems within systems. And so they have kind of predictable patterns. And one of the patterns that sometimes is sort of, this is our domain and this is your domain. So typically it's not under thought that teachers in the classroom, that there's this sort of line that they shouldn't cross. And I get that. And they certainly shouldn't be providing therapy. And I don't know any teacher who wants to be a therapist in the classroom. But at the same time, they are a critical caring adult in the lives of kids. And one of the things, I oftentimes when I'm training therapists, I talk about the oven that you were baked in, meaning your family of origin, that much of who we are comes from that oven. The second oven we're baked in is school. And so what makes us up, and I'm 68 years old, and I can still touch back to junior high experiences. I can still touch back to even younger experiences and how that shaped me. So there is, in my opinion, the relationship between teachers and kids is secondary and sometimes tied with relationships with parents. And so I think we want to do everything we can to resource teachers to play that role as that caring adult. Our whole agency's mission is we believe that relationships are the key to change. So any way we can resource a teacher to, be in relationship with a kid in such a way, or with a student, such that that student feels safe and can manage whatever is coming at them, then I'm all for that. Now, ideally, I think great schools are places where social workers and psychologists and counselors and teachers are all on the same page. Oftentimes they're not exactly, and that's not anybody's fault. That's not a blame game about, again, I think it's the system. I think it is, it's often about time. It's often about gigantic caseloads. It's often about, testing and everything else that's pulling people apart. But at this moment in time, when things have really slowed down to like what it is, and what you've got is this kid's connection is that teacher through the Zoom, whatever, then they absolutely, I think, should be resourced to ask how that kid is doing.
Okay, it looks like we have some comments in the chat. Can you see what they are, Jody?
Let's see, the students may have hired. Yeah, I think, Nicole, I think you're making a really good point there that if you're talking about maybe a middle school or high school student and they've got all these teachers doing the same thing, and they're disorganized and so absolutely, I think, coordination and teaming, and that's, one of the things I'm trying to do with this particular department is this, similar sort of thing, is that, you've got to decide, you've got to make a plan for, all the kids on in your class or on your caseload or on your team, and who's going to do that. So Nicole, you're absolutely right. That's a messy one.
So that's like middle school, high school, especially where the children aren't with primarily one teacher throughout the day. Right. So if you've given a breathing exercise to 10 teachers and the kid gets the same breathing exercise all day, we're going to lose them right there. They'll check out.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we in our alternative school, we had one student, in fact, say to her teachers, "I'm going to block you if you don't all quit calling me." So because I'm like, engagement, we got to engage these kids, don't lose these kids, and then we kind of had to dial it back. So, yeah.
And I agree that breathing all day is great. So I think with whether it's checking in or breathing, so what comes up for me, Jody, is that back to the inner lives of teachers. So what students will resonate with is what resonates with the teacher. So if the teacher is reading a script that they were told to do a check-in question or do a breathing exercise, and it sounds rote, it's not going to land. But if it's something the teacher has connected with and the teacher practices and the teacher has a conviction and cares about, then the students will be wanting to come into that space and feel welcomed in that space, and it'll feel authentic.
I think so.
Yeah.
But I think, I also respect the divergent opinion on that. And there are, all of us, we have our different strengths and talents and our comfort level and what have you. I have an avoidant attachment style myself. I'm not the, bringing on all kinds of hugs and, smiley face emojis or what have you, but I'm going to do it my way. And I do want to, and I share with our staff is that, because I'm also concerned about basic needs here. We're working with 95% poverty in our school. So it's also, how are you doing is also, is there enough food? That sort of thing. So Reen's got an interesting, let's see, as conversations begin next school year, distance learning, how do we build those relationships in the small moments? And distance learning and even hybrid learning is going to really make challenges, I think, about developing those kind of caring relationships between adults and students. And we're going to need to be really innovative and creative about doing that. And that's why I think, and I think, pairing with parents as best we can as well. My heart goes out to parents who are both becoming teachers or are teachers now as well as parents. So, how do you, it's about, I think, being a part of a larger community as well, and knowing that not any one of us can manage this. There's also something about, and I think, Joanna, if you publish what you've put together lately, I think it'll be good to see that, because I think you're right. In fact, even with staff, I'm not always asking anymore, how are you doing? Because that's a book now. That's not even, you want to be authentic and transparent about how you're really doing, but how do you even describe how you're doing? But I think there are other kinds of questions or other kinds of prompts or other kinds of just openings that you can give to young people to be able to speak to their experience. I'm a grandmother, and we Skype with our 6-year-old first grader who is grieving the loss of her classmates and her teacher, although they do a great job of Skyping and doing all kinds of different things to connect her. but you know, and she's melting down all over the place about just this. She's a very social kid. She loves school. And so just being able, even as a grandmother in the screen, to just say, you know, to just witness what she's going through and normalize it and predict it and just say that's, you know, it's going to be okay. And it sucks. It feels really crappy right now. I get that.
I mean, it's the biggest theme for me during this time seems to just keep coming back to slow down and listen, like however we do it. Because it's some people, it's mindfulness or it's a certain kind of checking question. But as you've indicated, we connect and we relate in different ways. But regardless, we all have inner emotional lives, and we all thrive and rely on relationship. And that's the container in which we can exist, in which we can learn, in which we can teach, in which we can grow. And as we look ahead, especially to the coming year and not knowing even what format, but even if students are coming back, it just seems to me there's going to be a much even greater essential component of social emotional well-being, because if we don't take the time to sort through and process and integrate and make sense of it, if we don't take the time to do the eye contact and say, it's okay, me too, I get it, I'm with you, yes, this is normal, it's going to be all right. If we don't do that, we're going to be disintegrated inside. I think of how Dan Siegel says everything in the diagnostic manual is disintegration. Like we're going to be lots of extreme parts of us, but we won't be able to show up for learning. And if we want students to show up, especially online, some huge chunk of our work together is going to have to all just be about listening and relating and connecting.
Right. Absolutely. Because there is not enough social workers, counselors, school psychologists, school-based mental health therapists to meet all that need. So it is going to be critical that every caring adult in the lives of those kids is able to sort through their own loss, their own fear, their own uncertainties, to be able to be present and be centered for young people.
And you know what actually just occurs to me, it almost gets me excited, is that, I mean, as a therapist, I often tell people, I'm just the aunt down the block. It's just that we don't have easy access to the aunt down the block anymore. So the funny thing is, now I have this profession and you pay me to do this. Mm-hmm. And in that, though, we've delegated this group of professionals to be the people who do feelings and relationships. But this is the fabric of being human. And so maybe the thing that excites me is maybe in this, as a community and as a world, we get to reclaim so much of what's innate in our capacity. And if we can muster up the courage to keep the company of what's inside of us and know that's okay too, and keep the company of each other amidst the discomfort and the unknown and the big feelings, mm-hmm. and to say, you know what, I can't do this perfectly, but I'm going to wade into it. Maybe we're capable of a great deal more than we know to connect with each other and care for each other.
Yeah, I think so.
I think we're going to have to.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's going to be required. I'm going to share. I think you're going to help me post this at some point on the on the website. But I was sharing. I was sharing with Joanna earlier that, of course, I'm reading everything about COVID and everything like everyone else is, and trying to make sense of the world. And then at some point, I quit reading certain things because I feel like it's getting repetitive now, and it's kind of like the blah blah blah. And there's a lot out there about, if you just do these 5 things, or if you just do these 10 things, that everything will work out all right, or what have you. And I do pay attention to some of that. But a thing came across my email in the last week that was shared with me by a Native American colleague, Mitch Walking Elk, and it's kind of, you'll find it in the internet. It's not clear who it's ascribed to. It says a message from White Eagle, Hopi Indigenous, on 3/16/2020. So I'll post this, and I won't read this letter to you, but it's really struck me, and it talks about this moment in humanity is now can either be seen as a portal or a hole. And either you're going to fall into the hole or you're going to go through the portal. And that resonates for me. And I think some of what I'm trying to do both with the school staff here in our small alternative school, as well as our 30 clinicians now that are, involved in telehealth and, figuring out how the heck do I do this work in a remote way, is that we need to be taking this time to learn what we can about this being together but apart, so that we can move into the future in a way that we're resourced to do this when we need to, and really have that perseverance and grit and nimbleness to be safe when we have to, and yet be together as soon as we can. So that's what we're working towards. And this writer asked the question, what world do you want to build? And so kind of given the idea that in this time that we're giving, this kind of goofy time right now, is how are you preparing yourself to be part of the group that's going to restructure the world? And that kind of is, my whole career is based on Billy Jack. So you can imagine that I'm getting kind of, there's a part of me that doesn't want to get out of bed, but there's a part of me that has some excitement almost about, wow, what could we change and what could we do? And that, this is, the whole experience has pointed out what was already there, such inequities in terms of social and economic opportunity. And so I don't know if we can, and then this goes to our work with young people as well, is what are we calling them to be and do? So it's not just, oh, I feel so bad for you that you lost school, but also, and what kind of person are you going to be? How are you going to help? So anyway, that'll be on the website, and we'll share with you.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
That's great.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Jody. Thank you very, very much. Yeah.
Thanks, folks. Hope it was somewhat helpful. Good luck.
Yeah.
Be well.
So before we wrap up, I'd love just to, so again, Jody, thank you not only for joining us today, but for just bringing the insight and the angle in so many ways into what's going on during this time. And it was just a brief time to be with you, but it definitely opened some new windows for me in terms of how we can look at and approach this time. We will post the quote/poem that Jody mentioned. I have put together a few, like a handout that's just a brainstorm of a lot of different ways we can ask those check-in questions that we can use for our own personal self-reflection as well as with other people. Next week, I'm delighted to share, we're going to, on our Sunday call, have teacher stories. And Jason Malley, who's with us, is one of the teachers we'll hear from. But I'm going to invite a number of the different educators who are in schools with us in Connecticut, where we're piloting the self-leadership approach, to come and share some of their stories. So I hope you can join me there. If you're interested just in general in staying connected in what's happening with bringing IFS and self-leadership into schools, you're welcome to join the distribution list that's on our website. So if you just go to selfleadershipcollaborative.org, you'll find the contact section. You can just sign up there. And finally, again, I want to thank again the Foundation for Self-Leadership. They're a public charity. They've supported generously the work that Jody and I have been able to do in schools, and without them, it really would have looked different.
That's right.
And they're supporting bringing IFS to many different domains. So if you're curious to learn more about them, you can look up the Foundation for Self-Leadership. And if you have the means and are able to even donate and support their work, they're doing great research and just amazing work in our community in many different ways to support well-being. So in any case, I want to thank you all for coming and joining us. And I hope you will be able to join us again next week. And finally, again, thank you, Jody. I hope you have a lovely afternoon in Minneapolis.
I will.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.